This year, a pie at Kidderminster cost £4.50, but a pie at Chelsea costs £2.50. But how much do you need to pay to get into the stadium to see the game and, more importantly, to get your pie? Well, Chelsea's cheapest match ticket costs £50, whereas at Kidderminster you can get in for £17. And what about your more loyal fans? The most expensive season ticket at Kidderminster will set you back £360, but at Chelsea, the cheapest season pass is more than double that at £750. In fact, last season in the Premier League, on average, you were looking at around £489 for a basic season ticket. With that, you could buy a 64GB iPad Air 2, or two 32-inch Samsung TVs, or 10 pairs of Converse high tops, or 48 DVD copies of Frozen, or 217 lattes from Starbucks. So is it worth it? That depends who you support. The cheapest season ticket at Man City in the 2013-14 season was £299, and, considering season tickets only apply to home games, that means those ticket holders saw their title-winning team win 17 out of 19 matches, losing just once, scoring 63 home goals and conceding just 13, meaning they paid around £4.75 per goal scored and £17.60 per win. On the other side of the coin, those sitting in the posh seats at Fulham paid £999 to see their team be relegated after losing 11 of their 19 home games, conceding 38 goals and scoring 24, which equates to £41.63 per goal scored and a whopping £199.80 per win. Seems like some football fans are getting a better deal than others. But in terms of money, that's nothing. How about when Man City played Fulham that season? On the 22nd of March 2014, Man City beat Fulham 5-0 at the Etihad Stadium. Over 47,000 people were at the stadium that day, and, if we ignore factors such as the economic situation of football fans, we can assume that the average fan in the stadium that day had an annual income of £27,000. During the game, Ivory Coast international midfielder Yaya Touré scored a hat-trick, 3 goals, and was substituted off on the 77th minute. Touré's reported wage for the season was a gigantic £210,000 per week. To think of that another way, he earned £840,000 a month, or just over £10 million per year, over 370 times that of the average fan in the ground on that day. In that week, the game against Fulham was the only one Manchester City played. So, to put it very simply, Touré was paid £70,000 per goal he scored, or £2,727 per minute he was on the field. In the first 10 minutes of the game, he had earned the average fan's yearly salary, and he didn't even score until the 26th. So, perhaps it comes as no surprise that the more expensive season tickets for the Etihad that season cost fans £780. Touré is one of Manchester City's top earning players, but all of the main players earn dramatically more than the average fan. The money for those wages has to come from somewhere, right? Perhaps, if the football fan wishes to see a higher quality of football, they should expect to pay a premium to see it. But how do those ticket prices compare to how teams around Europe charge for football? At the beginning of this season, you could get the cheapest season ticket for Spanish giants Real Madrid for around £174.65, cheaper than any Premier League club in the same year. However, their most expensive season ticket clocks in at £1,441.05, only surpassed in English football by Tottenham and Arsenal. 2014 French champions PSG charge anywhere from £336 to £2,114.59 for a season's worth of home games. And Germany's most successful team, Bayern Munich, charged just £109.65 for the cheapest season ticket, with the most expensive ones only clocking in at £587.38. Seems a pretty good deal for a team who, last season, won the league by 19 points and scored an average of 2.8 goals per home game. These fans, especially in Germany, seem to be paying less, in general, for their season tickets. So, judging by our earlier logic, they should be seeing a lower quality of football, right? The Champions League pits Europe's elite clubs against each other to find the best amongst them each year. Since the turn of the century, English clubs have won that title 3 times, Spanish teams have won it 6 times, Italians 3 times, and German teams twice. So what happened to that higher standard of football for those premium paying fans in England? And speaking of Germany, didn't their national team win a little tournament recently? The World Cup 2014 in Brazil, to be precise. A tournament to bring the world of football together for 32 glorious days of the highest quality football. But not everyone saw it that way. In the months and weeks before the tournament began, there were a series of protests across Brazil, questioning the amount of public money used to fund the tournament. Official figures suggest that the cost to the Brazilian taxpayer was around $7 billion, but ex-Brazil player and Congressman Romário has suggested that the figure is closer to $100 billion. We won't go into what that could buy you, but every one of Brazil's 200 million people could have one of those iPads we were talking about earlier. Not that an iPad will be many Brazilian people's first priority. Some reports suggest that over 250,000 people were evicted from their homes in order to accommodate the World Cup in Brazil, mostly from favelas, Portuguese for slums. According to a 2010 census, 6%, or 11.25 million Brazilian people, live in a favela. Although this figure is thought to be higher due to the lack of regulation, one estimate says there are around 180,000 people in Regina, Brazil's largest favela, compared with an official census figure of just 70,000. Conditions in these favelas vary. Some, like Regina, have relatively good access to running water and electricity, but other smaller favelas are rife with crime and poverty. According to The Telegraph, there are 37 murders per 100,000 people in Rio, compared with 1.9 per 100,000 in London, and there are 3 times as many people killed by police per year in Rio alone than in the whole of the United States. In Brazil, the GDP per capita, the average amount of money a country produces per citizen, and one way of looking at the health of the economy, in 2013 was $11,208, or £7,038. In the favelas, this is likely to be much lower. In fact, across Brazil, 35% of people live on less than $2 a day. And, despite more than $90 billion being spent on social programs, only 13% of this money ends up benefiting the bottom quintile of Brazilians. So, you can see why there was opposition to spending such vast sums of money on the World Cup when the poorest people are so obviously in need of help. But can a tournament like the World Cup actually be of benefit to the poorest people of a nation once the last ball has been kicked and the stadiums are empty? Let's take a look at South Africa. In 2010, the country became the first African nation to host a World Cup. Official figures state they spent $3 billion hosting the event, much less than even the most optimistic of figures reported for Brazil. But still, no small amount of money in a largely divided country where more than half of the child population lives in poverty and also has the highest number of HIV/AIDS sufferers in the world. GDP per capita in the country went up sharply following the World Cup, rising by around 27% in 2010 to $7,168 from $5,658 in 2009. However, this figure has steadily declined since 2011 and is almost back down to the figure before the World Cup at $6,618 in 2013. Despite the joyful atmosphere surrounding hosting the first ever African World Cup, South Africa made only 60% of the money it had expected to, and by the end of 2010 had made back just 11% of the investment in stadiums and infrastructure. So, for all the excitement and celebration surrounding the World Cup coming to town, it seems that, in the long run, the economic benefit to host nations is often minimal, and the average person in the country sees little change after the event is over. So those Brazilians living in the favelas might still be struggling financially in the coming years, and may still find it difficult to do the simple things like pay for basic food costs. Speaking of food, all this pondering has made me hungry. I think I'll have one of those pies from earlier. Oh, it's gone cold.